General Hospital will reveal Portia was once the ideal image of a devoted doctor, intelligent, principled, and filled with compassion. For her, medical ethics weren't just a professional standard but a steadfast belief that guided her journey of healing others. But then, the rising tide of both past and present threats surged against her all at once, dragging her into a darkness she never imagined she'd step into. When Drew, a powerful and influential congressman, began using the secrets he held to blackmail her, threatening to expose her manipulation of Heather Weber's lab results, everything spun out of control. The potential consequences were devastating: permanent revocation of her medical license, criminal charges, the collapse of her career, her reputation in ruins, and the likely end of her fragile marriage to Curtis. Under immense pressure from all sides, Portia began to unravel. She couldn't ask anyone for help, couldn't share her burden with Curtis, and certainly couldn't rely on the legal system or any remaining allies. In her most desperate hour, she returned to the one place where answers might be buried: Drew's medical files. As a physician, she had access to the hospital's internal database, and she used that authority to search for anything that could become a weapon, anything she could use to fight back against Drew. And then, hidden among thousands of dry, clinical documents, she found something no one had noticed. Alongside records detailing the mind control programs Peter August had implemented, including tarot card triggers and brainwashing sequences, Portia stumbled upon brief but chilling notes: neural microchip, Helena Cassadine, unidentified biocode sequence. According to the files, Helena had once ordered the surgical implantation of a microchip into Drew's brain, designed to exert complete control over his behavior and memory. Later, during a brain surgery, the device was supposedly removed. But one anomaly stood out to Portia: the surgical report failed to confirm the complete removal of the system. It noted only the extraction of the main physical component, with no mention of the residual biocode, a dormant piece of neural programming that had quietly remained, hidden deep within Drew's brain. This was no longer a medical file. It was a key, a vulnerability so deeply embedded that, if properly exploited, it could be used to control a man from the inside out. And in her desperation, Portia could no longer resist its allure. From that moment on, she embarked on a terrifying path. Gone were the operating rooms and patient rounds. Now, she spent her nights in a secret laboratory hidden beneath an abandoned building behind the hospital. It was there she began her silent descent into the forbidden realm of neural manipulation. Portia delved into restricted biomedical archives, infiltrated underground forums used by former Cassadine researchers, and eventually tracked down a specialist who had once worked on Helena's neural programming operations. Using a false identity, she hired him to decode the remaining biocode embedded in Drew's neurological map. The process was dangerous, time-consuming, and demanded meticulous precision. Each string of code was like an ancient puzzle, inching her closer to the ultimate goal: reactivating the microchip's dormant programming. Weeks passed in secrecy. Code after code was rewritten. Algorithms were tested hundreds of times. Finally, she developed a compact device, small enough to pass for an old pager, that could emit specific sonic waves targeting Drew's brainwaves. If the biocode responded to the frequency, it would mean success. And on a stormy night, Portia decided to test it. When Drew came in for a routine health check, Portia wore the device like a simple wristwatch. As he entered the room, she lightly pressed a hidden button. Within seconds, Drew froze. His breathing slowed. His eyes dimmed, becoming vacant. Then, he turned toward Portia with a blank, obedient stare. No one else saw the moment. But for Portia, it was thunder roaring through her consciousness. She had done it. She had taken control of a man. From that moment on, Drew became her instrument. Portia didn't use him for violence, at least not yet. Instead, she ordered him to gather confidential intel from private congressional meetings, to subtly sabotage investigations against her, and to exert pressure on her adversaries through the cloud of his public office. She manipulated everything, all from the shadows. Yet, peace never returned to her soul. Each time she watched Drew walk by like a hollow shell, she was haunted by the thought, what if he woke up? What if one day he remembered everything and uncovered the horrifying truth? Or worse, what if the biocode malfunctioned, turning Drew into an uncontrollable killing machine trying to reclaim his identity? Portia now held the darkest secret of all, not just a buried medical truth, but a living weapon. And like anyone who dares play with fire, she began to realize that awakening such a power might be the beginning of an unstoppable end. And then, the fateful moment finally arrived, on what seemed like just another ordinary morning at General Hospital. Drew walked into the examination room, unaware of the storm that was about to be unleashed. It was a routine checkup, scheduled in advance. He carried himself with the usual confidence of a rising congressman carving his influence in Port Charles. Meanwhile, Portia stood behind her desk, her heartbeat pounding beneath her calm, clinical facade. In the pocket of her crisp white lab coat was the small device she had painstakingly crafted over weeks. It wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon, a final move to reclaim control over her life from the man who sought to destroy everything she held dear. With a subtle press of her finger, a silent signal pulsed through the air, activating the precise neural frequency matching the dormant biocode still embedded in Drew's brain. Instantly, a chilling transformation took place. Drew's eyes darkened, the light of consciousness faded. The tension in his jaw relaxed, the lines on his face went slack, and his voice, once firm and commanding, now echoed with eerie flatness, ready to receive instructions. No nurse or passerby could detect the horror unfolding before them. Only Portia knew, in that single moment, Drew was no longer himself. He had become a puppet in her hands. A powerful United States congressman, now unknowingly bound to the will of the doctor he had once pushed into a corner. But Portia didn't let that success consume her with vengeance. She didn't act recklessly. Instead, she carefully devised a meticulous plan, moving step by step, using Drew as a shield to neutralize every threat surrounding her. Under her command, Drew infiltrated confidential congressional meetings, extracted sensitive information, applied pressure on those attempting to investigate Portia, and even sabotaged audits of the hospital's medical records. Every action he took was orchestrated to protect her. And Curtis, her husband, had no idea that his most trusted friend, a man he once fought beside and confided in, had become a tool for the woman he still believed was simply a devoted, upstanding doctor. However, Portia soon realized that with great power came even greater risk. Each time she issued a command to Drew, each time she watched him obey without hesitation, a piece of her conscience chipped away. Sleepless nights plagued her. She would wake in a cold sweat, haunted by the terrifying truth she carried. What if someone found out? What if her darkest secret was exposed? She wouldn't just lose everything, she would be imprisoned for life. Worse yet, if the control system malfunctioned, Drew could become a deadly threat to anyone around him. Her dread grew as she noticed something even more disturbing: the code in Drew's brain was evolving. Biological responses began to shift. Occasionally, he would hesitate. A flicker of awareness would flash in his eyes, brief but unmistakable, before slipping back into blank submission. Portia realized he was resisting. His consciousness was trying to resurface. And if Drew ever fully woke up, if he remembered everything, the first person he would come after wasn't an enemy from the outside, it would be her. Portia now walked a perilous tightrope stretched between glory and destruction. Each passing day wasn't just about executing the next step of her plan, but about surviving the growing torment inside her. Despite wielding so much power, she was losing herself. Though she had freed herself from Drew's threats, she had become a prisoner of her own silence. And in a place like Port Charles, silence never lasts forever. Portia kept trying to convince herself that everything she was doing, every reckless decision, every moral compromise, was all for self-defense. She told herself that if she didn't strike first, she would be destroyed. If she didn't control Drew, he would be the one to ruin her life, to strip her of everything she had worked so hard to build. And yet, as the days turned into nights filled with paranoia and dread, she began to see a truth that was impossible to ignore: she had gone too far. Far beyond what could be justified by survival. Far beyond anything she ever imagined she was capable of. At first, all she wanted was to reclaim a fraction of power, to shield herself from those who wielded influence and secrets like weapons. But with every command she issued to Drew, with every instance of him following orders without question or awareness, something within Portia began to break. It was slow, insidious, a corrosion of conscience, a silent unraveling of the woman she once was. She had crossed a line, one that separated medicine from manipulation, healing from domination. And in doing so, she was no longer just a doctor protecting herself, she had become something else entirely. In quiet moments alone, Portia would often find herself standing before the mirror in her darkened bedroom. But the woman who looked back at her wasn't the same one who once swore to do no harm. Gone was the devoted doctor who lived by her oath, the gentle woman who always put patients first, the selfless mother who sacrificed for her daughter. In her place stood someone else, someone with hollow eyes, dark circles etched deep from countless sleepless nights, and a face hardened by guilt and fear. The reflection was foreign, unfamiliar, and terrifying. Portia knew exactly what she had become. She was no longer just the keeper of a dark medical secret. She wasn't simply the woman who had found a vulnerability in a man's past. She was the one who had reactivated a neural program designed to strip away human agency. She had crossed the boundary between physician and puppeteer. And the worst part? Drew wasn't just any man. He was a former soldier, the product of some of the most sophisticated brainwashing operations in Port Charles history. He was a dormant weapon, a potential assassin in the guise of a congressman. By reactivating that bioneural code, Portia hadn't just turned Drew into a pawn. She had awakened something monstrous, something engineered for obedience, precision, and potentially lethal action. He might look like a politician on the outside, speak with conviction, smile for cameras, but behind that mask was something else entirely. And Portia had the remote control. The sense of power, at first thrilling, then satisfying, had now curdled into fear. She feared discovery. She feared the moment Drew might wake up and remember everything. She feared what her daughter would think if she ever found out. But most of all, she feared herself. She feared the woman she had become, the decisions she had made, and the reality that she was no longer a victim. She had become a perpetrator. Portia had transformed into something she once abhorred. She was no longer the healer, the protector. She was now the puppeteer of a man who could kill without remembering it. And no matter how she tried to justify it, no matter how loudly she insisted to herself that it was all for survival, deep down, she knew, survival is never an excuse to strip another human being of their soul. She was no longer the Portia of yesterday. Now, she was the woman holding the strings of a living weapon, manipulating a congressman whose every step was guided by her silent command. She had descended from the light of medical ethics into the shadow of control and corruption. And every day, as she stared into the mirror, she couldn't help but wonder, was there still a way back? Or had she become a prisoner of the very power she thought would set her free? Drew, beneath the polished facade of a duly elected representative of the people, continued to live and act under invisible orders. Each day, he appeared in public with a confident smile, composed gestures, and the authoritative voice of a man shaping the future of the nation. He spoke at congressional hearings, signed legislation, and stood alongside top political leaders in high-level briefings. Yet, behind the spotlight, behind the seamless exterior, lay a terrifying truth no one could fathom: he was no longer in control of himself. His mind was no longer his own. Every action, every decision, every move he made was under the silent command of a woman no one suspected, a woman driven to the brink of desperation. That woman was Portia. All it took was a simple touch, a gentle press on a small device hidden in Portia's hand. It looked like an ordinary smartwatch or a medical tracker, but in reality, it held the power to awaken something monstrous. With one pulse, Drew would instantly shift. In the blink of an eye, he would transform from a composed and commanding leader into something far more dangerous, a cold, calculated predator. The secrets locked inside his brain, the political strategies shaping the future of the country, were no longer his to control. They now belonged to Portia, a woman who once took an oath to heal, now wielding the terrifying ability to manipulate a man into becoming a biological weapon. The most chilling part was that no one suspected a thing. Not his political colleagues, not his security detail, not the voters who placed their faith in him. To the world, Drew was still the symbol of resilience, a war veteran who had overcome the scars of brainwashing and emerged stronger. But in truth, his will had been quietly overwritten. And that made him more dangerous than any weapon ever conceived. He could sit in the heart of classified briefings, absorb top-secret intelligence, and in mere seconds, turn that information into ammunition for a purpose no one saw coming. Portia knew this. She understood exactly how much power she held, and how dangerous that power truly was. But the question that haunted her every night wasn't whether someone would discover the truth. It was far more terrifying: could she still control the monster she had created? The monster with a human face. The monster who could smile, who could embrace, and who, with one signal, could become a tool of destruction. Drew wasn't just a puppet. He was a ticking time bomb. Portia had once believed she could control it all, that as long as the device worked, she held the key. But she had forgotten that Drew was not just circuits and programming. Inside him was a fractured mind, a consciousness once shattered, now beginning to stir. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when his eyes seemed to regain depth. Times when questions slipped out instinctively, as though some part of his identity was clawing its way back to the surface. Each time it happened, Portia's chest tightened, not just from the fear of losing control, but from the deeper terror that if Drew ever truly woke up, if he remembered what she had done, she would be the first one he would come for, not to forgive, but to punish. Portia's guilt was no longer hidden in the shadows. It had become her daily reality. Every time she saw Drew shake hands with a diplomat, deliver a speech, or pass her by with that eerie emptiness in his expression, she could not escape the thought, I created this. I turned a man into a machine that can kill. And if one day his consciousness fully reawakened, if his true self clawed its way back from beneath the programming, it would mark the moment Portia would face judgment, not in a courtroom, not before a board of ethics, but in the eyes of the man whose soul she had sacrificed to save herself.